What we're going to talk about today is state in SPFX ACES. And there's been a few questions I've heard from folks on state. There's a little bit of confusion maybe around state and how it relates to React state, because the methods you call, such as set state, are very similar. So one thing in React you can think about is every component in React can have a state of its own. So it can internalize its own state. You don't have to have a state in React. You can work without a state, but you can always have a state in a component in React. And in SPFX ACES, the state is shared across all of the card views or quick views inside that ACE. So every view shares the same state. Now, the reason for that is kind of like React is a much bigger thing. It's made to model potentially entire websites, much more complex systems, whereas ACES are more designed conceptually around a single user experience at a time, where it makes sense to have a single state. So something like a COVID check-in, checking the weather, reserving a desk in an office, or booking a flight, single interactions that typically would have, understandably, this idea of a shared state. So let's real quick look at a demo here. And so I want to refresh this page real quick. And you'll see when this first loads, I'm going to bump it into preview, it says 0 items found, and we'll just wait a little bit. Now it says 10 items found. And I'm going to click on the quick view, and you'll see I get this beautiful quick view card here, and it said loading, and now I get this information here. And I've got some buttons I can go previous, next. So loading again, why are we loading there? Why don't we just have that stuff ready? So this idea of state is important to understand. Everything in state is in memory. So you only want to load what you need at any given time. So let's, looking at that demo, we'll come back to that decrypt button here in a second, but I want to jump into some code. So this is a simple ACE extension that is more or less boilerplate, except for a couple of things. I've updated the state here to have a collection of items that are of this type up here with an ID, a title, and details, and then an active index number. That's which one I'm showing on that quick view at any time, right? And I'm going to come down here, and we always need to establish an initial state. And our initial state is always going to be nothing, right? It might be something. You could load something from cache. And again, I apologize for my voice. I'm coming off a really bad cold. But the state, you could load something from local storage, things like that. But we're going to start off with a state of no items, and our active index is -1, indicating to our code that nothing is or could be really selected right now. And then we're going to ignore this for a second, and we're going to do our normal card view setup or quick view navigator setup. The rest of this is all the boilerplate you get when you start up a solution. And then I want to real quick, before I talk about that code, come to our card view. And our card view is the card view you get right when you scaffold it, except I've just updated it here to reference this .state items length. And all we're saying is, hey, we found the length of the items array. And you saw that started out at 0 and then updated to 10, because we actually have 10 items in that list that's backing this example. And we come up here, and so what we do is we set our initial state, and then this other stuff happens. But what we do is delay here just so we can see the asynchronous effects of updating the UI and the flow. But we're going to get this data out of SharePoint. This is just some stuff to ensure we've got the sample list. We're going to get our items, and then we're going to set the state with those items. And then we're checking to see if we got some items, juggle our active index there. But we just want to set those items. So real quick, let's look at the get items method here. And so this is a case of where we only want to load what we need into state at any given time. But we want to load enough, to sort of optimize our network calls, right? So we want to load as little as we can, but just enough. So it's a balancing act, and I encourage you, as you're building your applications, to really think about that and think about those trade-offs of where you can keep stuff in state, keep stuff perhaps in local storage or session storage to reduce network calls, but then for things that are very large, only request those via network calls when it makes sense. And so what we're doing is we're getting the top 20, and we're selecting only the title and the ID. In this example, this sample details is a text field. but it could be potentially 100 other fields on a record, right, in a list, or a bunch of user data out of Graph, or something out of a SQL database that potentially has thousands of data points to it. So we only want to load the details when we need the details. The other thing we're doing here is we're caching in local storage, and this is another great capability you should take advantage of when you're doing any kind of SPFX programming, whether it's web parts or whether it's ACES. Store things that make sense to store in local storage or session storage, whichever is appropriate for your application, but make use of caching as much as you can. I know Graph Library supports caching, PnPJS supports caching, or you can just do the caching on your own, accessing the local or session storage directly. So we're going to get our items, we're going to stick them in our local storage, and we're going to prepend this little results transform into our stuff here, and then we're going to get our items back out, and so we can see we get our items. But when we get those items, another very interesting capability of state, and this is very similar to React, similar to React, works the same as you might imagine in ACES, where when you set the state, the application is going to update the UI for things that depend on that state. So the only thing we've done here is set the state. And because in our card view, we reference the state, when we refresh our page, we're going to get our 0 items and then our 10 items very quickly. And so this updates with no further code on our part. So you can also think of state a little bit like event-based program control. Updating state causes your application to do things or to change and update its UI. So it's another important thing to think about when you're thinking about state. The next piece of state I want to talk about is this idea of only loading things as you need them. If we look at the quick view, we only want to load these details when an item is selected. We default to selecting the first item, item 0, index 0, but then we have previous and next buttons here that you all have seen paging before in programming. No reason to go into depth there. We're only going to load those details. And we're not going to store those details in local storage or session storage, though we could. But again, that's thinking about the trade-off, storing stuff in memory, storing stuff in the browser on disk, essentially, because there's trade-off times between reading lots of data off the disk as well versus network requests. So things to really think about with state. But we're going to update our item. And because of the way JavaScript works, we can get our items, we can get the message out of those items. We can set that message's details once we get them, and then we can set the state of that entire collection again. And we'll actually, because of the way references work and such in JavaScript, we'll have updated the state again, and we're able to page through our items using the state. So we'll come back and we will look at that real quick. And so we'll go to our quick view. We're loading there, and these are artificial delays I've put in there. So this would be a lot faster, but I've put a little 3-second delay in there. So we can click through, we can see that's loading, right? We can click through, we can see that's loading. But when we go back, because we're updating the state, we don't need to load it again. We've got that value in memory. So we've loaded it only when we need it, but we've held on to it in case the user wants to go back and forth through the data. And if we go to the next one, we can see we're making those web calls there. And so just to show you kind of a little bit of the casting behind the scenes, we'll go to the network tab, we'll go to our quick view. We've made no request there. We're loading here, and we get our item there. If we go previous, nothing happens because we've got our value in state. Previous, nothing happens, still in state. 5 is in state, and then 6 will show up because it was not in state. And so we get our values there. And so that's a quick overview of state. And one thing I really want to sort of remind you of is state is this shared idea inside SPFX ACES. So all of the views, whether it's a quick view or a card view, even if you have multiple quick views, that state is shared within the context of that ACE. But you can also expand your thinking of state to also be state is what's stored in local or session storage. State is also what view is currently being shown. You could have multiple card views, multiple quick views. Which one is being shown? That's conceptually part of your state. And then finally, state is also a little bit of program event-based flow control. When you update the state, things in the UI will update and change. So you can think about how the user interaction is going to change the UI and back and forth with updating state. Some things to be careful of. You don't want to update state too often. You don't want to update state in a loop, right? So you might update state that triggers another thing that goes and updates the state that somehow gets you in a loop there. Something to be careful of there. So keep those things in mind when you're dealing with state. Finally, just for fun, we'll decrypt our message, and you can see our message there is to our rabbit agents in the field who are fighting the endless battle against the horses, whom we will all destroy one day. But so we're working hard against that. And so just we'll leave you with the idea of really when you're building your applications, understand and think about state within your ACEs so you can maximize both the initial load times, the UI performance of your application, as well as limit the amount of network traffic as much as possible, because ultimately all of those things come together to help build the performance profile of your application, and state is a core part of that. And so with that, I have finished under time, and we'll pass things back over to Vesa.
Thank you, Patrick. Really cool demo and great explanation on the importance of the state. And I I love the rabbit against horses discussion as well. But great work on the regardless of the voice challenges, and hopefully that will get better for the next one as well. But thank you, Patrick, on that one. Really, really cool stuff.